Hello everyone and welcome to my Java tutorial series. In this particular episode I'm going to be going over scope, overloading, and the this method. Now that may seem like a broad range of things, but they all have to do with each other. Now scope is fairly simple. You've actually already been using scope in your code already, but I wanted to address it primarily because if it is a term and it may come up, and I just wanted people to be aware of what scope itself was. So scope is essentially the act of how variables can be used in different locations and how they can be accessed in certain areas and not be accessed in certain areas. So for instance, if you create a variable in a class, you can use that variable anywhere inside the class. If you try to change the variable, or access the variable to use it in something, it'll be there and you can use it. But if you create a variable in an if statement or a for loop or a method, you then can't jump out of that loop, method, statement and then use it somewhere else. So let me show you an example of what I mean. If I create an integer called test and I set it equal to 8, I can't then go, I can go into this method and change this variable, test equals -8. Because, as long as this class is in memory, then that variable is going to be in memory. And then if I enter the method, the class is already in memory. The variable's in memory, so I can access that variable because it's there. However, I can't do the reverse, where if I were to set the variable to be 8 inside of the method, I can't take this out and then change it to be -8 in the class. Because once I exit out of the method, that variable's no longer in memory, and then, the tutorial class doesn't know it exists. Okay, so the same thing, of course, where you've probably messed with it is in a for loop. All right, so if I write a for loop here, I do for bytes I equals 5. We can do like I minus or something. I don't know. Right, and then you do this, and you can access what? And then you can use I. You could set I to be 7 or something inside of here. You can use I. But when I get outside of the for loop, I cannot be set to something. I cannot use I in something because I no longer exists. Which is why you're able to actually write multiple for loops in one program and not have to continuously use new variables. So that's, again, it's extremely simple, but I just wanted to clarify that whole concept is called scope. Now, overloading. Overloading is very cool. You can do it with methods. You can do it with variables as well, and also constructors. I mentioned a little bit of the overloading constructors in my previous tutorial on classes. But what's the cool thing about the whole overloading thing is obviously allowing you to have multiple names, and you can make a method. We can do another one here, random method, and as long as I give this, just like the constructors, as long as I give this a different argument, it'll be technically its own method, and I don't have to worry about the same name. So as long I could make as many of those as I want, as long as I have a different combination of arguments. Now I could have another one of these. Let me make a copy. Let me do int input double input 2. Now if I were to do double input int input 2, that would still be okay because they're in different orders. So I would still, whenever I'm calling the method, I would have to give a double first, then an int, or an int and then a double. Now, obviously, it wouldn't make all that much sense to do it, where you have two different ones for different orders. But I mean, you can if you want. But they would do different things, right? So as long as you have a different combination, you're fine. Now, if you change the return type, I could not change this to be something like a double. Now, it's going to give me an error because I don't have return type. But I couldn't change that to be a double and then, get rid of all the arguments. And, well, okay, it's a different return type, so technically it's different, so, it's going to be fine. No, as soon as I did that, this one is giving me an error because now it's the same name, right? So you have to make sure that the return type is the same if you're going to be doing this. I mean, you could change the return type if you want, but you would also have to change the arguments because then that would be an entirely different method. It wouldn't make sense for you to only change the return type and it still work because then Java doesn't know which value it's supposed to be returning. Is it supposed to be returning a double, or is it supposed to be returning nothing? Does it return a string? What does it return? It has no way of telling. So this only applies to the arguments. Now, this, of course, can be applied to variables in a small way by, let me do int test equals 10. Now, if I write int test equals 10, it's not going to give me an error. It would normally give me an error because I can't have the same name. But it doesn't give me an error in the method. Now, this, again, it only works with methods. If I tried this in like an if statement, it would give me an error. But this works in methods because you can overload the variable just like you would be overloading a method, except there's no arguments. It's just that it knows that this is inherently part of this method. So you could have like like if I were to do string string name equals company, and then I do semicolon, and then I could have string name employee, right? For I could have several methods, each with a different employee name or something, right? Like return name of employee. But then I have an overarching company name that I could also use in all of the methods. And so you can access both of them and still have the same name. However, your next question, of course, is going to be, logically, that how do you access both of them? If anytime I refer to name, it's going to be referring to this one in the method because that's the one that's default. So if I do name, if I were to use name somehow, let's just do system.out println. So if I pass it name, it's using this name, not this name. Okay. Now if I comment this out, then it'll use this name. It'll use that name. But by default, it's going to use the one that's in the method. So how would you tell it to use the one in the class? That's where the this method or command or whatever you want to call it comes in. If you type this and then dot before a variable, this is going to turn purple, and then it's going to change it to be the one to the class. So technically, you could do something like this. I'm setting this variable, this one here, which is company. I'm setting this name to be that one. Now that wouldn't exactly serve too much purpose unless I was going to return that value. But you can do stuff like that where you can set up the same. It seems very redundant and it kind of looks confusing. It's sort of like doing something like main equals new main. Where it's a lot of the redundancy. It's kind of similar to that, but it's telling it to use two different variables, right? So this is that name and this is that name. So that this command can be very, very useful. Now, there are many, many applications in which you could use this. It's a very handy tool to be able to use the two different variables like that. The general rule of thumb when using this is it always refers to the one that's located with the class. So you can only have a maximum of 2 variables overloaded like this. Because you can only have like 1 per method. You would only be able to have 1 variable with that name per method, and then you could only have 1 per class. Now you could have like 7 methods with overloaded variables, but they wouldn't be able to see each other's variables anyway because of scope. So at any given time, you would be able to have a maximum of 2 with the same name. So when you use this, it always refers to the one in the class, and when you don't use this, it refers to the one in the method. Because this, by definition, according to the Oracle website, this is a reference to the current object, the object whose method or constructor is being called. Right? That's. Let me just drag this over here to see what I'm reading. This right here. So that's just like the definition of what this is. So it refers to the current object, which is essentially the class. Right? So. Now, you can use this not only with variables, but you could use this with other things. You could reference classes, like if you have some sort of inner class, you could use this. It'll refer to whatever class you're referencing. It doesn't have to be just variables. This refers to the object. So if there's if there's 2 of something, it's always going to refer to the one that has the higher hierarchy, if you want to think of it like that. Now, you can actually use this as a variable in and of itself because it's referring to something. So if I go over here, and this is going to be somewhat confusing, I understand that, but just bear with me. This right here, this is what we're looking at, right here. So I'm using the word this, and by itself. There's no dot something. It's just the word this, because I'm assigning something. I'm referencing a class, and then I'm referencing a method in that class, and I'm passing it information, which is this. I'm adding the change listener. Now, change listener is a method, which I don't exactly know where that method is off the top of my head, but I'm passing it something. Now the object that I'm passing is actually this. I'm passing it this right here, this whole thing. And by putting this, because the object that I'm referencing is add change listener, I'm referencing the object that's looking for. All I have to say is this, and it knows that it's the one in the class, and it uses that one. Now I could specify it if I wanted to, but that would be long typing out, and I could just type out this, and it's using the one in the class. If I had more than one, I may need to specify which one I'm using, but I only have one in the class, so I can type this and it works. So you can use this as sort of a variable in and of itself to reference other things. So you can use it to refer to that. You can use it sort of variables and methods. You can use this in a lot of different ways. It doesn't have to be tied to just one specific thing. Now, let's see. That's pretty much it. Scope, cover that. Oh, one other thing. The scope thing also applies to class instantiations. So I've got main in the same package. Down here you can see there's main in the same package there. So if I do main equals new main, I could then type the exact same thing, Control C, in the method. And this main is completely separate from this main, so the same laws apply. If it's in like an if statement and you instantiate it, you wouldn't be able to access it outside, all that kind of stuff. It's the same as a variable, because in a way it is a variable. I could actually do, using this command, I can do main equals this dot main. Right? Yeah. So I'm actually using this dot for a class instantiation. So again, lots of uses for this, and that's pretty much all there is to all I wanted to talk about. As for overloading, that of course applies to constructors as well, which I did cover in the previous tutorial when I was talking about classes. But that's all there is really to it. I know it's not huge and incredibly advanced and stuff, but I did want to go ahead and cover that little topic. There was no real easy way to stick that in there, and nowhere easy to put it as far. I couldn't like put it too much early in the tutorial because you'd have to know about, you know, a lot of the stuff I was talking about, like classes and all that. You'd have to know about how all that works before you'd understand all that. So anyway, hopefully you enjoyed. Feedback is of course much appreciated, and I will see you all in another video. Thanks for watching.